Right. Mesdames et messieurs, good evening, good afternoon. Well, it's afternoon. So thanks for coming. And my name is Sumant. Our presentation today is about wearables and mobiles and how we have done some research based on the communication protocols for Bluetooth and BLE and what weaknesses exist. So why are we here? We are here to talk about wearable security, wearables and IoT being the latest trend in the market. We have done some work related to wearables security. Primarily, we have focused on Bluetooth and BLE. These are the communication protocols of choice for fitness trackers, activity monitors, what have you. And specifically from Bluetooth and BLE perspective, we have analyzed the base specification, what security it offers, how the spec describes how to do security correctly, how it does encryption and so on. But there is one important thing that we need to talk about, right? So we are not talking about the base spec security that is offered by Bluetooth. We know it's good, it does a pretty decent job. It does encryption. And here we are to show that that encryption is not enough. How do you get around that encryption? How do you break things? How do you affect the confidentiality and integrity of communication data going between a wearable device and a companion phone application? Quick round of introductions. So my name is Sumant. I'm a security research manager at Intel. I work out of the India office, and I manage the security team for a group called the New Devices Group. Primarily, we work on wearables related security. In my previous career and previous jobs, I worked for Sun Microsystems and for Palm, doing the same kind of security work. We also have a third security researcher who worked on this topic today. Her name is Kavya. She's not able to join us today, unfortunately. But I have with me my colleague, Eliza. I'll hand it over to her.
Hello everyone, it's Eliza here, and I've been working for Intel for last 2 years. So here, let's start by answering why IoT. In recent years, we have seen the progress IoT has made by allowing us to live a connected life all the time. Be it a smart home device, a activity tracker, a heart rate monitor. So, but when we say connected all the times, we also know that the communication links are the most power-hungry elements of a system. And BLE comes into picture there, the Bluetooth with low energy. So, but with the huge amounts of data flow between the devices, there comes lots of concerns. And security, of course, is one of the top of the list. So let me give you some example on IoT-related hacks. The baby monitor hack, the wireless car G hack by Charlie Miller and Chris, and also in Black Hat 2010, Barnaby Jack was able to hack many wearable devices, including pacemakers and all. So let's move forward knowing more about BLE. So when you look for the basic difference between BLE and BT Classic, we can see that with the advent of BLE, it enabled new applications which were not practical with Bluetooth Classic. By applications, I meant the coin cell battery, medical sensors, the wearables, etc. If we speak in numbers, we can see that the peak current consumption in BLE is almost 50% less than in Bluetooth Classic. Also now, Bluetooth 5 is here with longer range and higher speed. Here we're looking at the BLE protocol stack, which consists of number of layers and components. And out of all those, we have 5 main components which are of our concern: the CAP, CAT, SMP, ATT, and L2 CAP, and which are all part of the host portion of the stack. So here CAP is the one generic attribute profile which describes like how two devices will interact with each other by discovering or connecting and bonding. And CAT here is the attribute profile which describes how data will be transferred between two connected devices. It defines some characteristics and Okay, so characteristics here is where the actual value will be present, and like when we say data are read and written, those are the actually characteristics which are read and written in BLE. So SMP here is the security manager protocol, which is obviously like responsible for key generation and management, and ATT is the one which defines some rules for accessing data, and L2CAP is here responsible for multiplexing and encapsulation. So now let's see how BLE works. Here is an let's take an example of a wearable which is advertising its data to the devices in its range, and an observer which is like listening for a data and is interested on the data advertised by the broadcaster. So how it starts is like broadcaster will send its data in packets known as advertising packets in an interval known as the advertising interval. The observer, on the other hand, will scan for the data, and if it is interested on the scanning response which it gets from the broadcaster, it will send a connection request. If the broadcaster, on the other hand, accepts the request, it will assume the role of a GET server or peripheral, and the observer will assume the role of a GET client or central. The main point here is that after the connection is established, the data are not exchanged in a continuous space of time. So it's exchanged in an interval known as connection interval. And the value of this interval in the low power consumption of BLE. That was some basic introduction on BLE. Before moving to how BLE does security, let's understand some basic concepts of security related to BLE. So in a BLE connection, if one device wants to send data to another device, first it needs to pair. And we have 4 options. BLE provides 4 options to do the pairing mechanism. Those are the just works, numeric comparison, passkey entry, and out of band. So in just works, what happens? No pin exchange, or like both the devices, user have to enter the pin. So and out of band, like when both the devices are enabled the out of band communication in Bluetooth, then out of band method is used. In this method, all the key exchange or security information exchange are done out of the Bluetooth band. Say for example, NFC can be security and what type of keys are used and generated. So in BLE encrypts the channel with AES system cryptography, and the keys used to do so are exchanged using the pairing mechanism. One of the pairing mechanisms which we have discussed is with the pairing response. So here in this phase, actually what happens, both the peripheral and central exchanges their input-output capabilities, say authentication, bonding requirements, and list of keys, etc. After the exchange of the information, both the devices generate the first key, the temporary key, and after that, both the devices using some confirm and random values, they verify that both are using the exact key, and using the TK and random values, then both the devices generate the STK. STK here is the short-term key, and it is used to encrypt the further channel width until the exchange of next set of keys. The next set of keys include the LTK, long-term key, IRK, identity resolving key, and CSRK, connection signature resolving key. LTK here is the main key which is used for encrypting the further communication in a BLE connection. So LTK here is exchanged and generated using ECDH, electric curve Diffie-Hellman cryptography, and including this security, BLE also provides two extra features. So one of the feature is the early privacy feature, where the devices generate some random addresses to hide their identities. And those random addresses are generated using that IRK, identity resolving key. And later on, these IRKs are also used to resolve those random addresses to the actual MAC addresses. And CSRK here, it is used to sign the data. If you want to send data over our encrypted channel, then CSRK here is used to assign those data and send over the unencrypted channel. So this was all about the keys and all in BLE security, and as I already mentioned, it supports ECDH for key exchange and AES-CCM for encryption. For developer to establish a BLE connection, iOS provides a BLE framework with the BLE stack, which consists of some objects for discovering, connecting the peripheral and central, and also some data objects for data exchange. Likewise, Android also provides a framework which was introduced in 4.3, and for an Android app to enable the Bluetooth, it has to include two permissions in a manifest file. Those are the Bluetooth permission and Bluetooth admin permission. I spoke all about how BLE works and security and all. But if we speak about non-security risks in BLE, it's all about the proper choice of options which BLE provides. Say if the source mechanism is used, and it offers no way to verify both the devices. So obviously it will be like, it won't be protective against the MITM attacks. And also in Mike Ryan's research has proved that if you can eavesdrop the pegging mechanisms which happens in a BLE communication, then we can easily crack the encryption key. So that was all about the introduction on BLE and all. Now I'd like to hand over the mic to Sumant.
Right, thanks, Aliza. So that was the intro about BLE, what the spec is, what security it offers, what keys are supported by the spec itself. So let's move on to the actual research that we did, the security weaknesses that we found in the base spec, and as well as the adoption of the spec in some of the smartphone platforms. So if you look at a wearable ecosystem today, right? So for example, take a fitness tracker, activity monitor. There are so many of these products in the market, take any of them. Broadly speaking, this is what the general infrastructure, this is what the flow looks like, right? So you purchase a product, you open it out of the box, you typically install an app on your Android phone or on your iPhone. You install the app, and then you provision the device. Once you provision, the wearable device itself could connect to some external peripherals. It could be like a pedometer, a chest strap to measure your heart rate information, etc. And the app that you install on your Android or iOS also usually comes with a cloud-based account, right? So where you sign in, you have a much richer set of APIs, a web portal, some charts, graphs to see what your data looks like over a period of months, over years, and so on. So there is the backend infrastructure. The phone app, hopefully, always communicates over HTTPS, security consciously. And between the phone app and the wearable device itself, the commonly used protocols are Bluetooth and BLE. We spoke a lot about that. And to connect to external peripherals, commonly BLE and ANT Plus are being used. Rarely Bluetooth because it's too power hungry, resource intensive. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to look at just the highlighted area there, the communication between the wearable device and the companion phone application. All right, so let's start diving into the problem area. So if you look at the communication between the watch or a fitness tracker and the companion app, there is a whole bunch of data and commands going back and forth. So in the direction from the app to the watch, there could be two types of data going. One is a whole set of commands, right? So you purchase a watch, a fitness tracker, you need to update it, you need to do a firmware update. Your phone application comes to know that there is a firmware update. So what usually happens is that it sends a command to the wearable. It says, get into a position where you can accept the new firmware, and then it pushes the actual firmware itself. There could also be support for changing the broadcast name of the device. For example, if you buy an iPhone today and you provision it, by default it broadcasts the name that you use for your Apple account. People may not want to do that, right, out of privacy reasons. So you could change the BLE broadcast name, for example. In addition to that, there could be use cases that support some value-add features, like, for example, you use your wearable to increase the volume of music playing. Maybe you're running, you don't want to open your phone. Also, if you get a text, a Facebook Messenger message, a WhatsApp message, what have you, it is possible that some of these wearable devices will pop up a message, will throw a sound, do a haptic feedback, and you know what's going on. So in the other direction, from the wearable to the phone itself, there could be a lot of activity, right? So your wearable could be collecting your heart rate information, your GPS location information, as well as data related to your music, your calls, etc. And all that data is going from the watch or the wearable to the companion phone app. So going back to the BLE spec and what it offers in terms of security, Eliza spoke about a whole bunch of keys, including the long-term key. And the long-term key is used to encrypt all this communication between the wearable and the companion phone. I repeat, the companion phone. Okay. So what this means is that if there is a network-based attacker, someone who is sniffing on all the traffic that is going between the watch and the phone. For example, there could be communication between my watch right now and my phone. If you're sitting here in the audience using Ubertooth or something like that and sniffing the traffic, all you see is just garbage. You won't be able to see anything meaningful right now. That is protected by the BLE spec. It's encrypted using the long-term key. The problem, however, occurs if there is an application sitting on your phone where the legitimate app is also installed and is using the same Bluetooth framework, the same Bluetooth services and the BLE services that exists on Android and iOS, right? So the point here is that the DMZ, the militarized zone, basically is the entire phone and not the particular app that is communicating with the wearable. So that's where our punchline really is. So on all applications on Android and iOS using the standard ZigBee framework or the Bluetooth service that is in the Android SDK, as long as they use that, they get all privileges just like a legitimate application that is communicating with the wearable. And as Eliza already mentioned, on Android, all you need to do is use the Bluetooth and Bluetooth admin permissions. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, applications in the Android Play Store and the Apple iOS and the App Store that use these permissions, that use these classes, right? So the bouncer or whatever has happened to bouncer these days for policing the applications definitely does not filter based on these permissions that exist in your manifest file. So these are very safe. Apple and Google don't have a problem with these. And the Bluetooth admin looks like it's a privileged supervisory role. But if you look at the documentation today in Android SDK, it says the other abilities granted by this permission should not be used. When you're a malware application, you don't really obey the rules, right? So we did some research to understand what's happening in the market, both in products that does not have any Intel connection, as well as products that have an Intel connection because we work for the wearables group at Intel. And in the first ecosystem that we looked into, this is a really popular fitness tracker, activity monitor kind of a market segment. This class of products use BLE, and their code is proprietary. We did not have access to any of their source code. But there is some research that talks about what their headers look like, what the packet format looks like, and so on. And we just reused some of these blog posts and publicly available information to understand what the packet headers look like. Then we wrote a malware application. So all the malware application did was to look at all the GAT characteristics that the wearable device is broadcasting. And so if you look at the BLE GAT characteristics that this thing is broadcasting, there might be about 8 or 10 of them, not a lot. So by trial and error, we just listened to all these GAT characteristics. We then just subscribed to them using the standard SDK given documentation and then started listening to them. And if you look at the screenshot here, on the right-hand side is the malware app that we wrote, and the left-hand side is the good old Android logcat. And let me show a demo now to see what we actually did. So here the legitimate app is already running in the background. I'm not going to show you the app because you'll recognize what wearable it is. So the app is running in the background. It is connected to the fitness tracker already, and it is continuously getting information from the fitness tracker. So what we do is we also fire up the malware application that we wrote. And remember, the legit app is already connected to the device. So we now also connect the malware application to the device, and then we start listening. So the state changes to connected, and we get a dump of data here. I'm going to pause here. So in the malware application, we get a bunch of hexadecimal data, right? So it's not directly apparent what it is, but on the logcat window, you see that we have looked at the header format that we found in some blog posts. We deciphered what that, well, decipher is not the right word. It's really just looking at the offset in the packets that is coming in, right? So it's not encrypted, but at the packet level, it is just that at the 8th byte, for example, the heart rate information exists. At the 12th byte, the step information, step count exists, and likewise for the calories. So we just looked at what offset each of these biometric information is being broadcasted, and we're just printing that in logcat. So it's a very simple analysis of a piece of wearable that we don't own, that we don't have the source code for, but basically a malware application is fetching all the information that a legit app has. And what happens here is that we are just spinning the wearable to get the data continuously. So as the legit app gets the data, our malware app also starts scrolling, and in real time it is getting all the data that the legitimate application gets. So the second class of wearables that we researched into, it uses Bluetooth, BLE, as well as Wi-Fi. Right? So in this case, the wearable directly talks to the cloud, to the back end. And because the device now bypasses the whole channel of having a companion phone application, it makes it so much harder. This allows the wearable to also have much more stronger encryption to be built in, and therefore fewer app-associated threats. So we ran the same malware app to understand, to understand what is being broadcasted over the Bluetooth channel, and it turned out that we got nothing. So there was no risk in this case, and the application and the wearable turned out to be pretty secure. The third class of wearables was a little bit of fun. So in these products, when we ran the malware application, it turned out that by default, the wearable was just throwing us out. It was refusing to accept any commands, and whatever we did, we were not able to get any confidential piece of information from the wearable. So we tried to understand a little more, and we tried to come up with some other cases where we could subvert the system. So what happened here is that when we fired up the malware app and tried to do a factory reset, for example, it failed. But we decided to run the legitimate app, have it establish a valid session, have it establish things working between the application and the wearable, and then we fired up the malware app, and then we pushed a command, and that worked. Right? So clearly the developers here, the architects, had thought about security. So they had decided that when you write a legitimate app, when you write a companion app, it has to authenticate itself to the wearable, and only then it should do all its operations. So good job there, but they assume that once you set up a valid channel, everything is fine then. But clearly that's not the case. What happened here is that the malware app basically piggybacked on the existing channel and then waited for the legit app to be functioning correctly, and then it started injecting the packets, right? And that worked. So the moral of the story here is that you cannot just protect the handshake. You cannot just encrypt the handshake. You need to encrypt and protect and integrity protect every single piece of information that goes between the wearable and the companion phone application. So quick demo for that. Right, so in this case, we show the legitimate application first. We scan for the wearable, we connect to it, and essentially we are showing what the real application is capable of doing. Right, so in this case, we have the app connected to the wearable device, and in terms of functions, we have implemented a few standard functions: reboot, power down, and factory reset. So when we hit reboot on the real application, on the valid application, on the left-hand side, you see the Minicom logs there. The wearable device reboots. As expected, everything is functioning fine. And now we fire up the malware application, which we have basically implemented the same kind of features. I'm going to pause here. So basically, the idea here is that the commands that are being sent, reboot or factory reset, for example, these are just simple hex commands, nothing secret about it. Okay. So the malware application tries to do reboot, and it fails. So now we wait, and in parallel, we connect the real application. We also fire that up, and then we wait for the real application to connect and establish a valid session, do the handshake security, and then set everything, set the stage for the malware application to come in, and then we do a reboot command, and that causes the device to reboot. I think the video played ahead of my talk there, but you get the idea, right? So just the malware app, hit reboot, the device does not reboot because it says you're not authenticated, I'm not going to honor your command. But when you fire up the real app, establish the channel, and then you hit reboot on the malware app, that works. So the malware proof of concept is really, really simple. It's quite literally like one line of code to fetch the GAD characteristic and subscribe to it. So at the top, you see what the wearable is expecting. So the legitimate app expects that the wearable get the heart rate information, for example, and continuously broadcast that data to the companion phone application. That's fine, no problem with the code. And at the bottom, you see the malware application. So a precursor to what has happened here is that the malware app listens to all the GAD characteristics, which are essentially UUIDs that are being broadcasted from the wearable device. Anybody can do that. It's not protected at all. If you connect to a wearable using Bluetooth or BLE, you are able to get this information. And this particular piece of UUID that you see there, so that is the UUID that is being used to broadcast the user biometric information. Okay, so the malware app now just subscribes to that, and in the step above that, you see the characteristic.getValue, and if the characteristic is related to the heart rate, step count, and calorie related information, then just parse the packets coming in, find the right offsets, and there you get the steps, the calories, and the heart rate. Very simple. There is absolutely nothing complicated there. So why do we care? I know the security guys here are thinking, yeah, this requires a malware application to be installed on my phone because that's a trust boundary. That doesn't happen so often, and the Play Store and the App Store are really protected. But remember what I said about Bluetooth and BLE being very common. Okay, so the Play Store and App Store are not really protecting you from bad applications that just request Bluetooth admin privileges, number one. Secondly, the risk is somewhat medium because it is true that you require a malware app on your phone, but the impact can be really high. If you look at confidentiality, for instance, wearables are pieces of electronics that reside on your body, right? So you always have, the wearable has access to information like your heart rate, and more importantly, things like your location, latitude, longitude. If you go for a run with your fitness tracker, it knows exactly where you are, at what time of the day, how many days a week, week over week. And if a malware application gets access to that data, think about the physical security impact that can have. And in terms of integrity, if a malware app can simply send a rogue command and brick your device, that makes you go back to your store and asks you to ship the device back to the manufacturer, then that's really poor user experience. Likewise, in terms of availability, in terms of PR, wearables are really new to the market, right? So it's mostly these small startups. It's like these young companies trying to make a dent in the market. And if a very simple security bug like this comes and hits them, it could just mean even the question of being alive or dead in the industry. So what do we propose as the mitigation? The security objectives, when you start thinking about a solution, they're very clear, right? So we said the problem area here is that the entire phone comes into the trust boundary, and it's not just the legitimate app. The solution, just make the legitimate app being the trusted counterpart to the wearable. So allow communication only between the legit app and the wearable. And once you do that, you protect the confidentiality of all data that goes from the wearable to the phone. It could be the other way around as well. I spoke about the biometric information as well as notifications and value-add features. And in the other direction, protect the integrity of commands that are sent from the wearable, from the phone to the wearable. Things like factory reset, do a firmware update, do a device reboot. These are the commands that should be executed only by the valid application, not by any application. We make a few assumptions because these are hard. This is a hard problem to solve, honestly. So some of the assumptions that we make could be that the out-of-the-box experience, basically when you take the wearable out and you want to connect with the phone, the first application to talk to the wearable is the legit app. And depending on what you trust on the phone, it may or may not be in scope if the phone is jailbroken or rooted, because you may trust the application sandbox to protect some of these secrets. And also man in the middle during BLE is an assumption. So Elisa spoke about some of the JustWorks related security assumptions. By default, for example, JustWorks does not protect against man in the middle. So the flow is really simple. Like I said, both the malware app and the legit app exist on the same phone. We have the Bluetooth stack and the BLE stack and the BLE hardware on either ends. We pair between the phone and the wearable. It's not really an app on the wearable. And this channel is used by the legitimate app. But because the service and the framework exists so that it is multiplexing for all the applications on the smartphone, we have multiple apps using the same link layer to transmit data, which means the malware application is also using the same channel for communicating with the wearable. What we need is a separate secure channel between the application, the legitimate application, and the device, where that is limited to only the legit app. And if the malware app tries to behave in a way that is not conducive to the user, then that should just be thrown out. So this is a rough design, right? So a solution here, it doesn't have to be the solution, is where the legitimate app does a key exchange between itself and the companion wearable. You come up with key KP, and the key KP can be used for protecting the integrity of commands. Again, for example, factory reset, firmware update, and so on, using an HMAC with that key, and you send it to the device verifies it, and only then acts upon that command. And for confidentiality, you just use encryption. Because the malware application is ignorant of KP, it cannot do any kind of read or write operations. And because on the other hand, on the wearable side, assuming the wearable is always trusted, is just garbage if it tries to send a command. The real world does not look so rosy, right? So it's not one simple application, one simple service on the wearable side. The real world is much more complicated. For example, if I have a fitness tracker, I could have a fitness tracker that comes with a companion app. It could also be possible that the weather application, Uber, Facebook, any of these apps want to interact with my wearable. There are lots of use cases for that. And it is also possible that I may have an Android phone as well as an iPhone, and I install the companion applications on both these phones, and I want all of these apps on both my phones to talk to one wearable, which really complicates things. And of course, not to mention, there could be multiple services, A, B, and C, on the wearable that could be interacting with multiple apps. This really throws the key management out of the window, right? So it makes it so much more complicated. And it is also possible that the web-based services, the cloud-based services, offer ways to manage the keys, store the keys in the back end, and so on. But then you start thinking about privacy reasons. If I'm a cloud service provider, how do I ensure that the keys are protected? How do I ensure that I don't have access to the keys, the user keys in the first place? Right, so there are a whole bunch of things that come into picture when we are looking at the actual design for some of the wearables that we have in the market. How many apps do we want to support? Do we want to support an SDK? How many services do our wearables have? How do they do the mapping, right? And wearables are really tiny, low power, low performance devices. Crypto is hard. Crypto is expensive. How do I do AES on it? Is there hardware acceleration? Do I have to do it in software? If I have to do it in software, what libraries can I use? What algorithms do I need to support? And I have a whole bunch of keys. I could have an app-specific key. I could have a service-specific key. So what do I do with all the keys? How do I manage them on the wearable? How do I manage them on the phone? And if a cloud is coming into the picture, how do I manage with respect to protecting the privacy of the keys? So I'll do a quick demo of the fix. So we implemented a really simple fix. In this case, we open a legitimate application and connect to the wearable device that we have. And in this example, you see that we get a Facebook Messenger notification. So observe the top of the phone. There is a message there that comes in, right? So in the legitimate application, in the logs, you also see the same message. So this is normal operation. Everything is working fine. So now we have a malware application now that is also running in parallel with the legitimate app. And remember what I said. In this case, the same framework, the same classes are being used by the malware app, which means that if there is a secret message that comes in and the wearable gets it, the malware application can also get it in the normal case. So in the fix, however, that's the secret message that we got, but the malware application just gets garbled data. It's just encrypted, it has no idea what it is, but the legitimate app gets the actual message. So we have implemented encryption and integrity checks between the legitimate app and the wearable. The malware application now cannot get access to the data. So there are a whole bunch of solutions to this. There's a lot of onus on the app developers and the OEMs to implement some of these fixes. But if there is support at the Android and iOS security layers, then that makes the job a lot more easier for these class of devices. Right, so the BLE spec also could implement mechanisms where it allows for instance level security rather than protocol level security. So that's some of the things that we need to think about in the future. The problem area I want to highlight especially here, that we spoke so much about Bluetooth and BLE. The problem is not with Bluetooth or BLE here. The problem is not with Android and iOS by themselves either, right? So the problem exists in how the spec has been adopted on these platforms. The risk can be pretty bad. The wearable market is thinking about use cases where we are talking about using these for access control, for payment, for finance-related cases where things can turn really nasty if you lose track of personal information. And we know that protecting from network attackers is just not enough. So that really wraps up. I hope this was useful and you guys learned something. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them on the stage or after that.
Do we have any question in the audience? 1, 2, 3, no question. Okay, so we are about to move on to the next talk. Thank you very much for this presentation. Please remember that you can go talk with our guests whenever you want. They're still around, okay? They're not running away. Thank you very much.